A violent spasm racked my body, leaving only the acrid burn of bile in my throat. The bathroom door flew open without warning, and he stood there, a fallen god framed in the steam-filled doorway. And inside of me, a life that should be impossible was taking root, a secret conceived from the seed of a man who'd sworn he would never touch a beta. My name is Elias Vance. I'm 21 years old. In this world's cruel and unyielding hierarchy, I am a beta. That isn't an introduction. It's a life sentence. No alluring scent, no commanding pheromones, no notable reproductive value. In the social pyramid lorded over by apex alphas and built to cherish precious omegas, betas like me are the invisible majority, the silent workforce that keeps the world turning but never gets a starring role. We are the unremarkable, the functional, the background characters in someone else's epic. New York City, in all its glittering glory, never sleeps. Its relentless energy fuels the dreams of millions, but its harsh light also casts the longest shadows, and I lived squarely in one of them. Ever since my grandmother, my only family, passed away 2 years ago, I've been entirely on my own. My life as a third-year graphic design student at Pratt Institute was a frantic blur of instant ramen, all-nighters hunched over a flickering laptop, and a soul-crushing rotation of part-time jobs. From slinging coffee at a hipster cafe in Brooklyn to hauling crates on the freezing docks of the Hudson. I was used to being overlooked, used to keeping my head down. Until I met Julian Sterling. The first time was at Aura, a Michelin-starred restaurant in Manhattan where a single bottle of wine cost more than my semester's rent. I was a temp waiter, and he was a deity holding court at a VIP table. Julian Sterling, the formidable CEO of Sterling Industries, an S-class alpha whose mere presence was enough to command silent subservience. He sat amongst other powerful alphas, yet he was entirely apart, an apex predator exuding an aura of untouchable control. His black silk shirt was flawlessly tailored, a Patek Philippe watch on his wrist gleamed with cold, quiet wealth, and his sharp, slate-gray eyes surveyed everything with a congenital boredom. And then I did the stupidest thing possible. Exhausted and clumsy, I tripped, sending a full glass of crimson Cabernet cascading down the front of his pristine, bespoke suit. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. I will never forget the look in his eyes, not anger, not even annoyance, just a chilling, absolute void. It was as if I wasn't a person, but an inanimate object that had malfunctioned. He didn't say a word. He simply removed his jacket, dropped it on a chair as if it were contaminated waste, and turned away. That silence was more damning than any curse. I thought that would be the only intersection between our two parallel universes. I was wrong. 3 weeks ago, I walked into the gleaming Sterling Tower for an internship interview. I needed this job. I needed the experience, the connections, but most of all, I needed the money. As I was ushered into the final interview room, the man sitting behind a vast mahogany desk, his back to the panoramic view of the city, turned around. It was him. My heart plummeted into my stomach. I prayed he wouldn't remember a forgettable beta like me. But as I nervously presented my portfolio, he merely raised a single, perfect eyebrow. His voice, a low baritone that vibrated with power, was devoid of any emotion. Elias Vance. Third-year student at Pratt. You spilled wine on my suit at Aura last month. He remembered. He remembered every single detail. I was sure I was finished. But he didn't dismiss me. He kept me behind after the other candidates had left and offered me a special project. It was a contract. A 1-year contract to live with him in his private penthouse. The reason? The high society rumor mill was churning out stories that he, a prime alpha, showed no interest in any omega, sparking speculation about his preferences. He needed a temporary housemate. And a quiet, discreet beta with no disruptive pheromones and, more importantly, purr enough to be compliant, was the perfect candidate. The figure he offered was enough to erase my student debt and let me breathe for the first time in years. I signed it. The day I moved my single, battered suitcase into his palatial Upper East Side penthouse, he laid down the rules with icy precision. Elias, you're a piece of breathing decoration. Nothing more. Have no illusions, do not interfere in my private life, and you will never, under any circumstances, enter my bedroom. Do not cross the line. I nodded, promising myself I would live like a ghost for 1 year. But I never imagined that on one fateful, rain-lashed night, that very line would be obliterated. The rain came that night without warning, a furious, biblical deluge that hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. It was nearly 2 a.m, and I was in the kitchen, nursing a cup of cheap tea and staring at the sprawling, glittering city below, a universe away from my own. I heard the private elevator chime, a sound I rarely heard past midnight. When Julian Sterling stumbled into the living room, he was a masterpiece undone. His usually immaculate black suit was soaked through, clinging to his powerful frame. His tie was loosened, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, and the air around him was thick with the scent of expensive whiskey and something else, a raw, unguarded alpha pheromone scent that was sharp with distress. It was the first time I had ever smelled anything from him beyond a sterile, controlled neutrality. This was the scent of a storm raging within. My first instinct was purely human. I grabbed a dry towel from a nearby linen closet. "Mr. Sterling," I said softly, my voice barely a whisper. "You're soaked. You should." He turned his head, and his gray eyes, usually so cold and distant, were bloodshot and blazing with a desperate, unfamiliar fire. He looked right through me, then at me, as if seeing me for the first time. He didn't seem to register the towel in my hands. He took a staggering step forward, then another, until he had backed me against the cold marble of the kitchen island. "Don't," was all I managed to say before his mouth was on mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, it was an act of pure, unadulterated desperation. It was rough and punishing, tasting of whiskey and rain and a sorrow so profound it felt like it could drown me. His powerful hands gripped my shoulders, not with cruelty, but with the frantic strength of a man holding onto the last solid thing in a collapsing world. I was too stunned to resist, or perhaps, in the face of such raw, broken power, I simply couldn't. The tightly controlled alpha I knew was gone, replaced by a man hanging by a thread, and for some reason, I was the thread. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed, tangled in sheets that smelled faintly of him. He was gone. The penthouse was silent, sterile, and cold again, as if the storm had never happened. On my nightstand was a pristine white envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $50,000 and a single, typed note. "This was a mistake. An accident. Your silence will be rewarded accordingly." The clinical, transactional words were a slap in the face. He hadn't seen a person last night. He'd seen a momentary lapse in judgment, a problem to be paid off and erased. That evening, in the stainless steel sink of the vast, empty kitchen, I held a lighter to the check and watched $50,000, my ticket out of a lifetime of debt, turn to black, fluttering ash. I didn't know if it was out of pride or a deeper, more painful hurt I refused to name. A week later, the sickness began. It started as a wave of nausea in the mornings, which I dismissed as stress. Then came the dizziness, the bone-deep fatigue that left me weak-kneed after climbing a single flight of stairs. My body felt alien to me. The thought was absurd, impossible, a fantasy straight out of speculative fiction. Betas don't get pregnant. Our biology isn't equipped for it. But as the days bled into 2 weeks, a terrifying, undeniable suspicion took root. With trembling hands, I booked an appointment at a discreet, high-end Omega Health clinic on Park Avenue, paying in cash and using a fake name. It was the only place I could think of that might understand anomalies of the reproductive system. The doctor, a kind-faced woman with tired eyes, listened to my symptoms with a professional calm that shattered the moment the blood test results came back. She stared at the tablet in her hands, then at me, her mouth slightly agape. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice laced with disbelief. "This is unprecedented." "What is it?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "You have a 1 in a million recessive gene mutation," she explained, swiping through charts and diagrams that meant nothing to me. "Under extreme hormonal influence, like exposure to a highly potent, distressed alpha, it can trigger a biological cascade that mimics an omega's ability to conceive." She looked at me, her expression a mixture of scientific awe and grave concern. "You're pregnant, Elias. But this is incredibly high risk. Your body is not designed for this. There's an 80% chance your immune system will identify the fetus as a foreign body and reject it." I walked out of that clinic and into the bustling New York afternoon, a ghost amidst the living. The city's cacophony faded into a dull roar in my ears. In my pocket was a piece of paper, a printout confirming the impossible truth. I was carrying Julian Sterling's child. I was trapped in the lion's den, nursing a secret that could get me killed, a secret I already felt a fierce, terrifying instinct to protect. The penthouse, once a symbol of a life I could never touch, became a gilded cage. Every echo in the cavernous space, every whisper of the climate control system, seemed to mock my secret. Julian Sterling was a ghost in his own home, a fleeting presence in the mornings and a shadow late at night. The cold, transactional distance between us had returned, thicker and more suffocating than before. He looked at me, but his eyes were empty, as if the memory of that rain-soaked night had been surgically removed from his mind. Or perhaps locked away in a vault I could never access. For me, that night was a brand seared into my soul. For him, it was an entry in a ledger, balanced and closed. I lived in a state of constant, low-grade terror. My morning sickness became a carefully orchestrated ritual of silent suffering. I would lock myself in my ensuite bathroom, muffling the heaving sounds with towels, turning the shower on to mask the noise. I'd emerge pale and trembling, my reflection in the vast, polished mirror showing a stranger with haunted eyes. The scent of coffee, once my lifeline during all-nighters, now sent waves of nausea through me. Julian, ever observant, noticed the change. One morning, as I tried to slip past the kitchen, he was there, leaning against the counter, a stark silhouette against the rising sun. He held out a cup of coffee. "You look tired," he stated, not asked. It was a simple observation, but from him, it felt like an interrogation. My stomach churned. "Just working late on a project?" I lied, my voice thin. "I'm fine." He didn't press, but his gaze lingered on me for a moment too long, sharp and analytical. It was the look of a CEO dissecting a flawed balance sheet. In that moment, I knew I was a puzzle he was beginning to solve, and the thought terrified me. My life became a tightrope walk. At Pratt, I struggled to focus, the complex theories of design and color palettes blurring into a meaningless haze. My professors noted my declining performance. At my part-time job, I dropped a tray of glasses, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I was a fragile thing, stretched to my breaking point. The escape I craved came in the form of the New York Public Library's main branch, the stone lions guarding its entrance a symbol of the stoic strength I wished I possessed. I'd spend hours hidden away in the row's main reading room, surrounded by the comforting scent of old paper and the quiet reverence of strangers. There, I wasn't the beta carrying an impossible secret. I was just another anonymous face in the crowd. It was during one of these escapes, a dreary, overcast afternoon, that my carefully constructed world began to crumble. I had been at the library for 2 days straight, sleeping on a friend's couch and ignoring the string of texts and calls from Julian's assistant. They were impersonal, demanding to know my whereabouts, citing a breach of our residency agreement. I ignored them all. I needed to breathe, to think, to feel like myself, even for a moment. As I exited the library, the sky opened up, a sudden downpour soaking the city in minutes. I was fumbling with my worn-out umbrella when a sleek, black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the curb, its silent engine a stark contrast to the city's blare. The back door opened. Julian Sterling sat inside, looking out at me. The rain plastered his dark hair to his temples, and his gray eyes were like chips of ice. He wasn't supposed to be here. He had no reason to know my favorite hiding place. "Get in the car, Elias," he said. His voice was dangerously calm, the kind of quiet that precedes an earthquake. I froze, raindrops dripping from my hair and tracing cold paths down my neck. Students and tourists rushed past, seeking shelter, leaving us in our own isolated bubble of tension. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the rain. "You've been gone for 2 days. You've been ignoring my calls." I am not a patient man, he stated, each word a precisely cut stone. He stepped out of the car, the rain instantly darkening his expensive suit, and walked toward me, heedless of the downpour. I have people who can find anyone anywhere, especially when they are under my roof and my responsibility. He grabbed my wrist, his grip like steel. It wasn't violent, but it was absolute. Unyielding. Let go of me, I hissed, trying to pull away. No, he said, his voice dropping lower. I have indulged your evasiveness long enough. You've indulged nothing. I shot back, a surge of desperate anger overriding my fear. You're the one who destroyed my life. For a fraction of a second, his composure cracked. A flicker of something, shock? Hurt, crossed his features before being replaced by that familiar, impenetrable mask. I never forced you to sleep with me, he said, his tone glacial. But you never said you were sorry either. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and final. The rain lashed down, blurring the sharp lines of his face, but I could still see the tightening of his jaw, the subtle clench of his fist. For the first time, I felt I had landed a blow, that I had pierced his armor. I am not a good man, Elias, he said slowly, his voice a low growl. But don't think you can run from me. From now on, I'll be picking you up from school myself. Every day. You're insane, I whispered, horrified. Perhaps, he conceded, pulling me closer until I was flush against his cold, damp chest. The faint scent of him, sandalwood and power, overwhelmed my senses. But you are not allowed to disappear again. He leaned in, his lips brushing against my ear, his breath a hot caress against my cold skin. And then he delivered the final, devastating blow. I know you're pregnant, Elias. The world tilted on its axis. The roar of the rain, the shriek of a distant siren, the frantic beat of my own heart, it all dissolved into a deafening silence. Every muscle in my body locked, and the air I was desperately trying to draw into my lungs felt as thick as concrete. He knew. The secret I had guarded with every fiber of my being was no longer my own. You think I'm an idiot, he whispered, his voice a venomous current against my ear. The morning sickness. The fatigue. The way you flinch every time I come near you. I had your toothbrush sent for DNA analysis a week ago. I cross-referenced it with the records from the Park Avenue clinic you visited under the name Adam Cole. The results are unequivocal. That child is mine. A strangled sound, half sob, half laugh, escaped my lips. I shoved him away with a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, stumbling back onto the wet pavement. You violated my privacy. I accused, my voice trembling with rage and betrayal. You spied on me. I was protecting my asset, he retorted, his face an unreadable mask of stone. But his eyes, they burned with an intensity that belied his calm words. It was a possessive, predatory fire. Protecting me? By stealing my DNA? Is that what you call care, Julian? Or is it just another form of control? The dam of my fear and restraint finally broke, and the words poured out, bitter and scalding. This isn't about responsibility. It's about you owning everything and everyone you touch. It's about not losing you, he bit out, the words raw and guttural, as if torn from a place deep within him he never intended to reveal. The confession hung in the air, so stark and unexpected that even the relentless rain seemed to pause for a beat. I stared at him, speechless. Julian Sterling, the man who moved through life with the emotional depth of a glacier, had just admitted to a fear. He, who viewed attachments as liabilities and emotions as weaknesses, had just said he didn't want to lose me. My mind reeled. This wasn't part of the script. He was supposed to be cold, to offer me another check, to demand I terminate the pregnancy. He wasn't supposed to sound human. It's too late, I finally whispered, clutching the strap of my canvas bag like a lifeline. I turned my back on him, a definitive act of rejection. I had to get away. I had to protect this child not from a monster, but from a man whose world was built on power and control, a gilded cage where love would surely suffocate. You think I'll let you just walk away? His voice was low and menacing right behind me. You don't have a choice. I have every choice, he countered, his steps matching mine. When that child carries my bloodline. He stopped me again, this time his hands landing gently on my shoulders. Elias, he said, and his voice was different now. Stripped of its usual authority, it was raw, almost pleading. I know I am not a good man, but I will be a good father. And if you give me the chance, if you just give me a chance, I will learn how to be the man you deserve. The plea, coming from him, was more powerful than any command. It was a crack in the fortress, a glimpse of the man behind the sterling name. I didn't turn around, but tears I hadn't realized I was holding back began to stream down my face, mingling with the cold rain. I didn't know what was real anymore. Was this another calculated move, a strategy to secure his heir? Or was it the first, clumsy, genuine admission from a man who had never learned the language of the heart? I pulled away and ran. That night, I found myself adrift in the city's unforgiving landscape. I couldn't go back to my friend's couch. I couldn't impose this chaos on him. My old apartment was long gone. The penthouse was unthinkable. I was homeless, pregnant, and being hunted by one of the most powerful men in the world. My phone buzzed relentlessly in my pocket, a constant, vibrating reminder of his pursuit. Messages from him, each more urgent than the last. Come back, Elias. Don't do this. You're not alone. I won't let you raise my child in the gutter. I finally powered it off, the silence a small, temporary mercy. With the last $100 in my wallet, I checked into a grimy, hourly-rate motel in Queens, the kind of place where dreams go to die. The room smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. The sheets were thin and scratchy, the walls so thin I could hear the couple in the next room fighting. But it was anonymous. Here, I wasn't Julian Sterling's secret. I was just another lost soul. I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, one hand resting protectively on my still flat stomach, and watched the city lights through the dirty window. The next morning, as I was choking down a stale protein bar, there was a knock at the door. Not the timid knock of housekeeping, but 3 sharp, authoritative raps that echoed with finality. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, who it was. The door, flimsy and cheap, splintered open under the force of a single, well-aimed kick. And he stood there, framed in the doorway, a vision of chaos and fury. His tailored suit was rumpled, his hair a mess, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, which were red-rimmed and feral. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked like a man who had torn the city apart to find me. Did you really think, he rasped, his voice raw with exhaustion and rage, that you could just disappear? I scrambled to my feet, instinctively positioning myself between him and the only exit. The dingy motel room, already claustrophobic, suddenly felt airless. Julian Sterling's presence was a physical force, sucking all the oxygen out of the space, his potent alpha pheromones flooding the air not with aggression, but with a scent of sheer, undiluted panic. It was the scent of a predator who had found its lost cub, and it sent a confusing shiver down my spine. "This isn't your property," I said, my voice shaking but defiant. "But the person carrying my child is," he shot back, his eyes scanning the squalid room with disgust. He took a step inside, his expensive Italian leather shoes looking grotesquely out of place on the stained, threadbare carpet. "This is no place for you, Elias. Come home." "I don't have a home," I retorted, the words tasting like acid. "And I won't be commanded. You don't get to just show up and order me around. Have you once, just once, stopped to ask me what I want?" His jaw tightened, and for the second time in as many days, he was silent. He had no answer. The Julian Sterling I knew always had an answer, a solution, a strategy. This silent, uncertain man was a stranger. I pressed my advantage, my voice rising with the injustice of it all. "I want to have this baby in peace. I don't need your money, and I certainly don't need a marriage of convenience arranged to appease your sense of duty. This isn't a corporate merger, Julian." "This was never about duty," he said, his voice low and intense. He took another step, closing the distance between us. "It's about what I want." I laughed, a humorless, broken sound. "I don't believe you." "Then I'll prove it to you." He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a sheaf of papers, not the cold, corporate contract I'd signed before, but something that looked different. He held it out to me. "This is a new agreement. A prenuptial agreement, and a trust for the child. But more importantly, it outlines my commitments to you. Read it." There are no clauses about compliance or silence. Only provisions for your care, your freedom, your education, and your future, with or without me. It's a proposal, Elias, not a command. You have all the power. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. The man who had once called me a breathing decoration was now offering me legal and financial autonomy, handing me the keys to the kingdom while asking for nothing in return but permission to stay. Before I could process the words, a sudden, searing pain shot through my lower abdomen. It was sharp and terrifying, like 100 needles stabbing me from the inside. A gasp escaped my lips and my knees buckled. The room swam before my eyes as the world dissolved into a haze of agony. Elias. Julian's voice was sharp with alarm. He lunged forward, catching me just as I was about to hit the floor. He swept me into his arms, holding me tight against his chest. For the first time, I saw raw, unfiltered fear in his eyes. He fumbled for his phone, his hands, the same hands that signed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, were shaking uncontrollably. Hospital. We need to get to a hospital, now. I was too consumed by the pain to protest. As he carried me out of that hellish motel, I was vaguely aware of his voice, tight with panic, barking orders into the phone, arranging for the best maternity specialist in the state to meet us at the emergency room. During the ride, he never let go of my hand, his grip a desperate anchor in a sea of pain. He kept repeating it, over and over, like a mantra, a prayer. It's going to be okay. You'll be okay. I'm right here. At the hospital, he was a force of nature, a controlled hurricane of wealth and power. He bypassed the entire emergency room queue, his name opening doors and summoning doctors like a magic spell. I watched through a fog of pain as he argued with the head physician, demanding the best care, the most advanced equipment, his voice laced with a desperation that was utterly genuine. His cold, corporate mask had been shattered, and what lay beneath was a man terrified of loss. The doctor's final diagnosis was a threatened miscarriage, brought on by extreme stress and the inherent instability of my rare condition. A beta pregnancy of this nature is like walking on a razor's edge, she explained gravely to Julian. He needs absolute rest and zero emotional distress. Julian just nodded, his face pale and grim. I saw it then, clear as day. He was afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. When I woke up later in a private, sunlit hospital room that looked more like a 5-star hotel suite, he was asleep in the chair beside my bed. His head was slumped forward, his rumpled suit a testament to the night's ordeal, but his hand was still clutching mine, his fingers intertwined with my own as if he was afraid I'd vanish if he let go. He didn't look like the man I once knew. Gently, I squeezed his hand. His eyelids fluttered open, revealing those slate-gray eyes, now soft and clouded with exhaustion. He stared at me for a long moment, a world of unspoken emotions passing between us. I don't need a contract anymore, he said, his voice hoarse. Just, let me stay. Let me be here with you. Please. I didn't answer. But this time, I didn't pull my hand away. And perhaps, in the quiet acceptance of that touch, I was admitting that I no longer had the strength, or the desire, to push him away. My return to the penthouse marked the beginning of a new, unsettling chapter. The gilded cage was now a sanctuary, but the rules of engagement had been irrevocably altered. There were no contracts, no spoken arrangements, only a fragile, unspoken truce. Julian Sterling, the man who once demanded I remain an invisible fixture, was now a constant, almost overwhelming presence. He began working from home, his formidable corporate empire managed from a sleek home office where he could be mere steps away from me at all times. The shift was jarring. He transformed from a distant overlord into a meticulous, almost obsessive caretaker. The cold, sterile silence of the penthouse was replaced by the quiet hum of his activity. He hired a world-renowned nutritionist who specialized in high-risk pregnancies, and every meal was a carefully balanced, gourmet creation that he would often prepare himself, his brow furrowed in concentration as he followed the chef's complex instructions. I'd watch him from the doorway of the kitchen, this titan of industry who could make markets tremble with a single phone call, painstakingly slicing vegetables with an unfamiliar clumsiness that was somehow more endearing than any practiced skill. "I learned from the chef last night," he'd explain, a faint flush on his high cheekbones, as if embarrassed by the admission. "Stayed up until 3 practicing. If you don't like it, I can have him make something else." "It's good," I would murmur, my head bowed over a bowl of quinoa and steamed salmon, the unfamiliar taste of his effort making my heart feel strangely full. Our days fell into a quiet, domestic rhythm I could never have imagined. After breakfast, he would insist on a slow walk in the penthouse's private rooftop garden, a breathtaking oasis of green suspended high above the city. He'd walk beside me, his hands tucked in his pockets, not touching but always close enough to catch me if I stumbled. His gaze, once so unervingly analytical, now often rested on my stomach, which was beginning to show the slightest curve. The look in his eyes was a complex cocktail of awe, anxiety, and a profound sense of responsibility. "Have you thought about names?" he asked one morning, his voice so soft it was almost carried away by the breeze. The question caught me off guard. "Isn't it a bit early?" I deflected, a nervous laugh bubbling in my throat. "I want to take this seriously, Elias," he said, stopping to face me. The city skyline behind him was a grand, impersonal backdrop to the intense intimacy of the moment. "Everything. From the beginning." He paused, his gray eyes searching mine. "This isn't just about the baby. It's about you." I took a step back, my back meeting the cool stone of a planter. My heart was hammering, not with fear, but with a dizzying, terrifying hope. A man like Julian Sterling didn't speak in such terms. He dealt in assets and outcomes, not in feelings and forevers. "I know you still don't forgive me," he continued, his voice a low, resonant hum. "But if you'll let me, I'll spend the rest of my life earning it." I turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "You talk as if you love me." He didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched, filled only by the distant hum of the city. I thought he would evade the question, retreat behind his usual armor. But then, he reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear, his touch sending a jolt through my entire body. "I don't know if love is the right word for it," he whispered, his honesty raw and disarming. "I don't know what love is supposed to feel like. But I know that when I wake up, you're the first thing I think about. When you're in pain, I can't breathe. And when you disappeared, I went insane." He leaned closer, his voice dropping even lower. "If that's not love, then it's something more powerful and, frankly, Elias, it scares the hell out of me." Before I could respond, his phone, which had been silent all morning, began to ring. It was his personal line, the one reserved for the most critical emergencies. He glanced at the screen, and the warmth in his expression vanished, instantly replaced by the icy mask of the CEO. "I told them not to call before noon," he muttered, his jaw tight. He answered, and his side of the conversation was clipped and authoritative. "What is it?" "The board is trying to what?" "I'll be there in 30 minutes. He ended the call and turned back to me, the conflict warring in his eyes. He took my hand, his grip firm. "I have to go. Something at the office. But don't go anywhere. Please. Wait for me." I didn't speak, but I gave his hand a small, reassuring squeeze. He held on for a moment longer, then turned and strode toward the elevator, the powerful CEO once more. As the door slid shut, a strange, hollow feeling settled in my chest. Perhaps he wasn't the only one who was scared. Because in that moment of vulnerability, I realized my own heart was beginning to sway in a way I had never, ever intended. I was starting to fall for the man I was once determined to hate. The afternoon bled into a moody, rain-swept evening. I sat curled on a plush sofa in the living room, a cashmere blanket draped over my legs, stroking a small, fluffy Persian kitten Julian had brought home a week prior. "To keep you company when I'm not here," he had said, a gesture so unexpectedly thoughtful it left me speechless. I'd named him Ash. As Ash purred contentedly in my lap, my mind kept replaying Julian's words from the morning. "If that's not love, then it's something more powerful." I had spent my entire life believing I was destined for a quiet, unremarkable existence. The thought that an alpha like him, a man who could have anyone or anything, was being unmade and remade by his feelings for me was a truth too staggering to fully accept. Yet, the evidence was all around me, in the carefully prepared meals, the silent companionship, the terror in his eyes at the hospital. This painstaking attention was more unnerving than his previous coldness because it demanded something of me in return: trust. Just as I was drifting into a state of weary contemplation, the penthouse's intercom buzzed. The doorman announced a visitor. Ms. Isabelle Laurent to see Mr. Sterling. The name sent a jolt through me. Isabelle Laurent, the beautiful, blue-blooded Omega heiress to the Laurent conglomerate. The society pages had been linking her with Julian for years, calling them the ultimate power couple. She was the woman he was supposed to be with. Before I could even process it, the elevator doors opened, and she swept in. She was even more stunning in person, tall, elegant, dressed in a Chanel suit that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. Her pheromones were subtle, but exquisite, like rare orchids and champagne, an immediate and potent reminder of everything I was not. "Hello," she said, her smile polished, but her eyes sharp and assessing. "You must be Elias. I've heard stories." Her gaze drifted pointedly down to my slightly rounded stomach. "It seems the rumors are true. A pregnant beta. How wonderfully novel." I stood up, my hand instinctively resting on my belly. "If you're here to see Julian, he's not here." "Oh, I know," she said, strolling further into the room as if she owned it. "I came to see you." I had to understand what kind of magic a plain little beta could possibly possess to make Julian Sterling lose his mind. "He called off our engagement negotiations because of you, you know." My blood ran cold. Engagement. He had never mentioned an engagement. "He's not losing his mind," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "He's making a choice." She let out a short, brittle laugh. "Don't be naive. This is a fit of guilt, a temporary insanity. A child born of a beta has no standing, no power. Julian needs a proper heir, an alpha born of a powerful omega. He's just fulfilling a fleeting sense of responsibility. Once the novelty wears off, he'll come back to where he belongs." Her words were like expertly thrown darts, each one finding a tender spot of insecurity I didn't even know I had. But as she spoke, something inside me solidified. It wasn't just my own heart I was defending now. "Whether it's responsibility or something else," I said, looking her directly in the eye, "it's between him and me. It has nothing to do with you." Isabel's smile vanished. "You listen to me," she hissed, stepping closer, her polished veneer cracking to reveal a vicious jealousy. "You will never be part of his world. You're a dirty little secret he's hiding in this ivory tower. When you are no longer useful, you and that thing will be discarded. That's enough." The voice was like a blade of ice, cutting through the tense atmosphere. Julian stood in the entrance, his suit damp with rain, his face a thunderous mask of cold fury. I had never seen him look so angry. He strode across the room, not even glancing at Isabel, and came to stand directly in front of me, positioning himself as a human shield. He turned to face her, his voice dropping to a lethally quiet register. "Isabel, you will leave this home, and you will never speak to Elias again. The only reason our families ever discussed an engagement was for business. There was never anything else. And for the record, I was the one who called it off, long before I realized what Elias truly meant to me." Her face went pale. "Julian, for him? For a beta?" "For myself," he corrected her, his voice absolute. "Because I have finally found something real in a world of transactions. I've made a lifetime of calculated decisions, Isabel. Choosing Elias is the first one I've ever made with my heart." She stared at him, speechless, her pride and composure crumbling. After a long, tense moment, she turned on her heel and walked out, her retreat as swift and silent as her arrival. When the elevator doors closed, the silence she left behind was profound. Julian turned to me, his shoulders slumping slightly, the anger in his eyes replaced by a deep, weary vulnerability. He reached out and gently cupped my face in his hands. I'm sorry, he whispered, his thumbs stroking my cheeks. I am so sorry you had to endure that. I should have told you about her. I should have protected you better. I leaned into his touch, my throat tight with emotion. You did, I finally managed to say. You came home. He pulled me into a gentle embrace, his arms wrapping around me, holding me not with possession, but with a reverence that made my heart ache. I will always come home to you, Elias, he murmured into my hair. Always. In the quiet warmth of his arms, with the rain pattering against the windows and a tiny life stirring within me, I finally let go of the last of my fear. This was real. It was complicated and terrifying and messy, but it was real. And as I wrapped my own arms around him, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I was no longer a background character. I was home,